Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. I'm going to give folks a few minutes to fully log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. It looks like most folks are here, um, but I'll give them another minute or two. All right, we'll just give another 30 seconds or so for people to log on, and then we'll get moving. All right, let's get started. So a few things before we begin. There is a little question box at the bottom. If you do have any questions, please use it. As a test, why don't you type in there if you can see and hear me okay? I'll wait to see if folks, and this way I know if you can both see me and hear me and use the question box. Perfect. Thank you for everyone who typed a little note in. So we're going to talk a bit about evaluation and mentoring programs. These webinars, for those of you who've been on them before, this is the second time in 2020 that we've done something on evaluation, is really high level, just basic overview of just best practices and some things to consider. If you do have specific questions about your program, please type them in, and we'll try to get to them if we can. If it's something super specific, reach out to me afterwards. I'm always happy to be a resource. But typically if one person asks the question, everyone does. So feel free to throw that in there. There's going to be a few polls and things like that, so be on the lookout. But we'll go ahead and kind of get started. So for those of you who don't know, Mentor New York is a New York State affiliate of Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. What Mentor New York does is we serve as the resource and support network for mentoring programs across the state. We have our headquarters in Manhattan. We also have an office in Western New York. That's where I'm based out of, our office in Buffalo, as well as an office on Long Island. But we serve programs really anywhere in the state. We have partnerships, I don't know, probably in every county. So that's a bit about us. We do offer these webinar series, free for programs, as well as, lots of individual support as well. And we'll talk more about that at the end. But if you do, at the end of this, and you're like, I really want some more individualized support for me and my program, please feel more than free to shoot me an email, which I'll have at the end. So let's get started. So a bit about me, just so you know who I am, for those of you who don't know me, I think most of you do at this point. I'm the Director of Training and Program Development for Mentor New York. My background is in social work. I do have my master's in social work from the University of Buffalo. I've been working with youth and youth programs for, I like stutter every time I say it because it blows my mind, 15 years now. My 15-year work anniversary in a few weeks. It's pretty much the only thing I've ever done, which is why, it's good that my job is to talk to people about it. And so I've worked with programs across the kind of spectrum. So from after school programs, I've worked in the schools, and I've worked after school programs, summer camps, community-based organizations, community centers, public and private schools, charter schools, really with them all. And so hopefully some of that experience comes in handy for us today. So when we think about program evaluation, I really want to focus on three specific questions that we want to ask. The first is, what do you do? The second one is, what are your strengths and weaknesses? What are you good at? What do you need to work on? And lastly, how do you know? And these are the three questions that really, when we think about how do we measure our programs and measure impact, these are the questions that we're really trying to figure out. What do you do? What are your strengths and weaknesses? What are you good at? What are you weak on? And how do you know if that's what you're good and weak at, right? And so there's a number of different ways to do this. Like I said, this is going to be a pretty high level overview. So we might not get to everything for every one of your programs, in the next, 45 minutes or so. I try to keep these to about 40, 45 minutes. So there's room for questions at the end. But we're going to start there. So we want to start at the beginning, right? Where all of this starts with your mission statement, your program's mission statement. And so if you are running a program that's part of, say, a larger organization, so say, you're the nonprofit that you're a part of is going to have their mission statement. And that might be the same as your program, might be different. Your program should have its own separate mission statement that says, what do you do? What population are you doing it with? And why are you doing it? What is the goal and mission of the work that you do? It's very specifically to identify the purpose of your program existing. My program works with young women to connect them with professional women as mentors to expand their exposure to careers in law or something. Very like, what is it that you do? Who are you doing it with? And what are they getting at? And then you want to start thinking about how do we start extrapolating that into our theory of change. So your theory of change is where you really break down what is it that you're doing with the people in front of you in order to achieve some type of outcome. So we're taking young women at the school where our intervention that we're delivering is based on providing them access to social capital, professional identities, and exposure to adult professional women they might not know otherwise. And the outcome of that is that these young women will then be able to pursue careers and have career opportunities in front of them that they might not have had otherwise, right? So we know that by taking these young women who are might not have the social capital in place in order to be exposed to some of these careers or fully maximize their economic and professional potential, that we take them, we apply this intervention, and then on the other side there's some type of outcome, positive outcome for young people. And we know this innately when we're doing our programming, right? When we're developing a program, we know, we want to take young people, we want to do something with them, and we want to have some type of, positive outcome at the end. What's really important is taking it and putting it on paper. And once you have that in place, you can start putting together some type of logic model. And so your logic model is just a much more detailed analysis of what are your resources, what are you doing with those resources to achieve very specific outcomes. Really detailed so you can start thinking about what is it that our program does. Let's take apart the machine and let's take a look inside and see, if we are taking all of these resources that we are given on one side and we have outcomes that we're hitting both short, medium, and long term on the other side, what's happening in that black box of our program that helps those resources turn into those outcomes. And we're going to talk a bit more about that in detail. So what I want to start with is just a quick poll, and it should pop up. But it's going to have a few options. You can select more than one. But which one of these does your program have in place? So a mission and vision statement, a theory of change, written out, a detailed logic model, and then do you have pre and post tests that you use with your young people or mentors, and you also have some sort of more detailed and in-depth evaluation protocols that includes more in-depth surveys or something like that that's beyond just pre and post tests. So there we should launch now. I'll give folks a minute or so to fill in. Looks like we're almost all the way there. Give people another minute, a couple of seconds more to get the last few votes in. It's always nice when people are responsive to these. Sometimes I gotta sit here and wait for people to vote. And it's like, come on. All right, that looks good. Let's see the results. Share results. So it looks like just about everyone has a mission and vision statement, which is good. That's always definitely the first step. About 60% have a detailed theory of change, 50% have written out logic model, 60% of you use pre and post tests, but only about 20% use something more detailed in depth as surveys than pre and post tests. Awesome. So we're going to walk through just all of those different pieces in a bit more detail. I'm not going to spend time on mission and vision statements because typically most programs have that in place at the very least. So we're going to talk about theory of change, a logic model, and pre and post test, as well as some surveys. Again, if you have specific questions about your program, please put them in because it's hard to make this relevant to everybody. But we're going to try something else here, another little interactivity piece. So you can either use, I didn't turn on texting. So you have to use the website at the top, but you can go there. What I want you to think about is type in, what is a successful outcome for your program? You can pull this up on your phone. It's a quick little website, it's pretty easy. But what is a successful outcome for your program? What does that mean? If you were to tell me what briefly an outcome that is, successful outcome is, what would that be? So it should come up as people go in. So you're starting to trickle in. Let's get a few more. Awesome. Always nice when this works. It's always a gamble. See someone's popping up a bit more than others. Awesome. It's always a good sign. So some things that are popping up, we see, skills, community, self. I think that was from self-confidence. I think I thought self-esteem in there as well. Confidence, connection, that's always really important. Community, empowerment, support. And so all of these things, as we're kind of developing, figuring out what our program does, it's about understanding, like we started from the place of what are the outcomes that we want to be able to say that we're doing. What is it that we believe we are good at? And what is it that we believe we are making an impact by doing? And so starting with these successful outcomes is really crucial. A lot of times when I'll talk to programs who are just starting, they'll be like, I really want to start a mentoring program in my community. I really want to make a difference. Like I'm really passionate about this. I just want to help the kids in my community. And so much of it is like, okay, that's cool. But what specifically do you want them to be able to do? And so, it's really coaching these, especially newer programs around, what is it exactly that you want to be achieving? Is it some sort of job readiness? Is it academic skills? Is it social emotional growth? Is it building, just providing caring adults and providing, modeling healthy relationships and healthy communication and connection? So much of the big work of identifying and starting the process of building some sort of, even basic program evaluation procedures is around identifying, what our program actually does. And so starting with what is that successful outcome with, and using that to influence, some type of theory of change. So here's an example of an organization that does community organizing. So, not youth work. So we can kind of take out of that space for a second. And their theory of change. So what they start with is you have on one side, what they have here is their current conditions. And so what they have is their analysis of the issue. They've identified the problem that their organization is trying to solve, right? And so for them, that's an extraction economy, right? Where resources of workers, the environment, and communities of color are taken by a small corporate elite to the long-term detriment of all. Very specific issue that they've identified. Then what is it that they are doing with that, with the current conditions, to find their vision, right? So on the other side is their vision. And that's a vision of a living economy, where economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, and social justice are balanced to the long-term benefit of all life. So they have their idea of what's going on now, where the issue is, and where they want to be. What is the vision for their program? So if you're working with, again, just to use the example of the Young Women Employment Program that I just made up at the beginning as an example, right now we see that, young women of color who are coming out of, say, urban communities are having a difficult time finding, safe, steady employment that is able to provide them a living wage. That's the current issue. Our vision is a community where young women are able to find adequate and safe employment that is able to provide them a living wage, right? Very simple. Right now they can't. We want to be able to help these young women do that. And so in the middle, you start building up these steps of what is it that we want to get to? What are those steps that we're going to build to get from the issue that we've identified to the end? And so some of this is in your program design, right? But part of what we have to make sure we're doing evaluation, is not just trying to prove our program's success. Because a lot of what we see in like youth programs, especially in the nonprofit field, is that they tend to build organically, right? So you identify an issue in your community that you see, and then we take time to, we're like, okay, well, there's kids in my community that don't have anywhere to go on Saturdays. I'm gonna, work with the community center to set up a place for them to go on Saturdays so we can at least spend some time with some caring adults. Now, all of a sudden, I've also got these young people hanging out at this church, on Saturdays at this community center. Let's get some adults from the community who can come in and really connect with them and work with them to, build some of these skills that we want to do. Now, all of a sudden, we have a mentoring program. Now, let's start to build on that and be able to say, we're going to add a little structures, build a curriculum. And it starts to pile on itself just organically. And so being able to take that step back and say, okay, what is it that our program actually wants to be able to do in order to achieve our vision is different than what is our program actually doing right now. And so part of developing these evaluation protocols is, again, thinking back to those questions, right? What do we do? And so the first step is taking that step back and saying, what do we actually do? And then 2, what are we good at and what are we not good at? And then 3, how do we know? So again, thinking about it from that perspective of we have identified an issue, we've identified a vision, and then developing what intervention do we place between those two things in order to achieve that vision. So bringing it back to this example, you can see they have strategies around relationship building, around setting the public debate, engaging individuals. They have different actions that they take place as part of their work. So you have coalition campaigns, capacity building initiatives, and community visioning, so bringing people together. Lastly, having some sort of impact, creating good jobs, reducing pollution, advancing their social justice, expanding democracy before their vision. So they start with their current conditions. They build on strategies that help them elevate what they want to do as part of that work, which turns into action steps, which turns into some pieces of impact that they're making, which turns into their long-term vision. pause for any quick questions about this so far. Okay, let's keep moving. So we're going to talk about logic models briefly. I don't want to go too in depth with this because this is could be a webinar all on its own. And so I'd rather spend a bit more time talking about some of the other stuff in a minute. But I do want to make sure we touch on this. You know, this is, I think, where a lot of programs who are evolving, this is like, I think developing the logic model is like that graduation piece from we're a new program to we're a mature program. It's one of the main differences that I see between programs that are able to, you know, really secure long-term funding, are able to really have strong staffing long-term, are able to, you know, really tell the narrative of their program, is those who've really taken the time to write out a logic model. So you'll see them in lots of different formats. This is a really basic thing that that we use when we talk about, you know, how to just a template. I like the other one, the theory of change, a little bit better because you get a bit more detail and you can see how the program works. The problem is with like a really detailed logic model, it's very detailed and hard to follow, and so it doesn't really work great for a PowerPoint slide. But you can look them up online. Lots of organizations have theirs on their websites. You can see. If you want more specific examples, just reach out afterwards. But you start again on the left and you think about on the right. So on the left, you have your inputs, right? What are these things what are the resources that we have in place? So that can be, you know, financial resources like money, you know, time, facilities, like do you own a building or do you have access to someone else's building? Do you have equipment or some type of, you know, physical resources? So for example, access to a community center and a gym. Do you have access to, if you're running a program that's specifically focused on, my favorite example is I work with a program here in Buffalo a lot that does like boat building. They build wooden boats with kids, and they have a whole massive wooden workshop because it's a whole organization and center that's built around, you know, it's like a wood shop, you know, for boats first that happens for our youth program. So they have access to lots of really specific equipment around all of the different ways to build boats. Staff, partnerships, infrastructure. I think one of the big things on here too is how do you access and resources around the young people that you're working with? Like how are you reaching them? Where are they coming from? Do you have partnerships specifically with a school or a community center? If you're working with mentors, where are you getting them from? You have partnerships with an employer, with you know, school is providing teachers as mentors, or do you have a network in the community that you can pull on? All of these different pieces. You know, do you have a strong infrastructure of, you know, like a strong and capable board of directors? Do you have really clear policies and procedures around your program operations, or is it still kind of in development? All of these different pieces are resources that get put into the kind of black box. You know, because I do think that what happens a lot, especially with youth programs and with mentoring, I've seen frequently, is it's talked about like it is this sort of like black box, right? Like we just take these things and we put them into this box. We let it sit for like a year, or they have a relationship. They pull them out on the other side, and they have great outcomes. But we have no idea what's going on the inside. We're not going to worry about that. It's just you take these kids, you take these adults, you put them together, and then in a year later, everything's great. And so, you know, if you think about the inputs of those things, you're throwing into that black box, and the outcomes are what you're pulling out of it. And so the activities and the outputs are the things that are happening when they're in there. So activities are things that you're doing with those resources. It's great you have those partnerships. It's great you have access to that space. It's great that you have some, you know, money and staff that you can work with. But what are you doing with all those things? So maybe they're field trips. Maybe it's, you know, mentoring relationships. You know, you're developing, you know, matches. You're able to provide, you know, really detailed training and supervision to your mentors because you have the resources to do so. You know, you're able to provide really rich experiences for your mentors, mentees to do together because you have access to space and equipment to do that. You know, you're able to I was trying to think of a good example for, why a strong program infrastructure helps. But, because you have such a good infrastructure around your policies and procedures, as an organization, you're able to put those sort of things on autopilot, those kind of back office things. So you can really focus on the young people because you've spent so much time on infrastructure. So, all these different pieces, what are those things that you're actually doing with those resources? And so the outputs are just, this is the one that gets a little bit funky for people. And if you have worked on logic models, this is where I think people get the most confused. But it's about those direct products of those activities. So those workshops, those trainings, how many matches are you having? How many field trips are they going on? What kind of workshops are you doing? How much of a policy book are you able to develop? Things like that. And so then those become those outcomes. So what are those short-term outcomes? Typically, those are really, like it uses the example here, changes in learning. So specific knowledge, skills, and abilities, deeper relationships, maybe a small amounts of academic improvement. These are typically, I think of short term, we're talking within the, immediate, maybe 6 to 12 months of your programming, right? Like while it's happening. What types of things can you expect to see there? With your medium term outcomes, you're thinking about changes in action, so different behaviors, practices. Maybe this is, if you're doing more policy change as well. So if we're working with young people who are experiencing homelessness, and we're thinking about also how are we impacting policies on organizations that serve these young people, you're going to start seeing these. And this is really that, I think, it depends on what your program is, but those couple years outcomes. Like if you're doing this work for a couple years, what are you expecting to see down the road? Some things with young people, especially with mentoring, we know is that you're not going to see the impact of that work right away. It's going to take time to get there. And so what is it that you're expecting to see down that road? And then long-term outcomes, what type of impact you're seeing. This can be that, pie in the sky stuff for programs. We'll use that here. So they'll say like, eradicating childhood poverty, or, I don't know, all equitable access to education, all those different things. What are those real, when you think about what your program is doing, what are those real long-term results? So again, I'll use the example of this program that I just made up about young women and economic empowerment. So the short-term outcomes might be just boost in self-esteem, awareness of careers, exposure to different workplaces. Medium-term outcome might be more academic improvement, depending on their age, maybe filling out a certain number of college or job applications, or getting into a certain number of higher education programs, or job training programs, or employment, that they find employment, things like that. And then long-term might be financial security for them and their children. It might be something like housing stability for something that's just longer term. And so you see on one side, you have this idea of your planned work, right? What is it that you're doing? You have your resources and you have what you're doing with those resources. So all this is that program design. What is your program doing? And then your intended results. So you have, what are you actually getting out of it? And what are the outcomes there? And so once you have these all written out, these outcomes and these outputs that you're able to say, this is what we hope to get out of this program and this work that we're doing, then you can start to measure. What happens sometimes is that programs will, instead of starting with this idea of a logic model and a theory of change and then identifying what they want to measure and then measuring it, they'll start with what's easiest for us to measure, or we'll talk more about this in a second, what makes the most sense for us to measure based on just like what we have available. So for example, we're a school-based program, so it's really easy for us to track academic enrollment, academic improvement. So we're just going to track academic improvement and hope that our mentoring program has an impact on that, or attendance, because that's just what we have at our fingertips. But we're not designing we're not merging how we design our program with what we're intending to measure. We're just kind of going on the path of least resistance. So that's why, to me, why logic models are so important. And especially I think if you don't have one, or if you do, it needs some work, it's a good time to do it. So let's talk about measurement and instruments. So a lot of most of you said you use some type of pre and post test. Not a lot of you said that you use much more than that. And so we're going to talk a bit about that. But so briefly, I don't want to get too in depth with this, but talking about qualitative and quantitative measurements. So when you're talking about qualitative, we're talking a lot about, actually easier to talk about quantitative first. Quantitative data is things that are numbers, right? So, if we're using really things like, we have students' grades, like a GPA, and we want to track that improvement. If we have things like attendance, like numbers of attendance, numbers of suspensions. It could also be if you're using, surveys using things like a Likert scale, right? Where it's like you're having them scale on a 1 through 5, or, yes, no as like a 1-0 coding. But you're using numbers to do that analysis. And most of this, the power of quantitative data is that it can be very impactful in the way that you're able to say very clearly, like, this is impact that is happening. This is stuff that we're having, our students are improving on, and we can show it right here. Qualitative data is on the other side, where it's more, it's in words, for lack of a better term. It's talking about things in the ways that we express. So maybe it's open-ended questions on a survey, it's interviews, it's anything that's more in the form of not numbers. And qualitative data can be really more powerful on a more emotional level, right? Because you're really getting to the heart of, like, someone talking about the impact that your program had on their life, or the struggles that they were dealing with. And so what you really get out of the qualitative is that more, that emotional side of it, that really being able to get that interpersonal piece of what is it that people are really experiencing. The problem is that most of us who are doing measurements in this work because people are giving us money and they want to see impact. The problem is that when you use one of these, you're missing out on the other, right? So if you're just using just quantitative data, if all of your stuff is numbers, you really miss out on the very human, interpersonal, real aspect of what's happening in the program. If you're just using qualitative data, then it's a lot harder to be able to show real impact. It's a lot harder to be able to say, their grades have gone up this much, or attendance has gone up this much, or their scores on this social emotional development survey have gone up a certain percentage. And so being able to really, you want to make sure you're using a combination of the two, and you want to be able to think about it. How do we start developing this theory of change into a narrative, right? We take these young women, we provide them with these resources, and this is what happens when they come out on the other side. And we're using data to tell that story. And so part of that is going to be, quantitative, in that we want to show how many job applications have they completed, how many of them have, gotten employment, how many of them have retained employment for over a year after finishing the program. But you also want to make sure that it's qualitative. You want to be able to talk to them and interview them and say, them hearing their voices around the impact that your program had on them. What was their experience like? Those sort of types of like testimonials and things like that, as well as just being able to interview them. And so you start to be able to figure out how you turn that series of measurements into a story. And so again, asking yourself, what do we do? What are we good at? What do we need to work on? And how do we know? And so what do we do is all about that theory of change, to develop in that logic model. It's developing that really clear sense of what do we do. The other piece of it is, what are we good at and what do we need to work on? And so a big part of being able to provide some of this stuff too is that once you start building some of these measurements, particularly if you're doing a good job of mixing the qualitative and quantitative, is you're going to start getting a sense of, like, is your theory of change accurate, right? Is what you think you are making an impact on actually happening? And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes what your program is doing is different than what you might have thought you were doing. So, an example of this actually is a program that we work with that partnered with a local high school, and they were right near the school, and they have a group of students that would come over after school. It was a group of like 20 of them, to do group mentoring once a week for the school year. And there was one young woman that was part of the program, and she would come to the first couple sessions. She was just so quiet and really like meek, and it was really hard for her to engage fully. And by the end of this year, she was just like the most outgoing one. She was the leader of the crew. She was like the class clown, cracking jokes. Everyone loved her. Like, she was hilarious. Just, super outgoing. I only met her at that like later point. And when they were describing her to me when they first got in there, I couldn't believe it. And they had a close partnership with the school that they worked with. And so this young woman, they were all excited because they were like, this is going to be great. Part of our program is all about building self-esteem and self-confidence. Look how this young woman that we've been working with really broke out of her shell and emerged into this, powerhouse of a leader. And so they went to the school and they were like, because they're also getting data on, they partnered the school to get the academic, grades and things like that. So they had their kind of quarterly meeting with the school to touch base with them. And at the end of the year, they were compiling the reports. And so they wanted to talk to this girl teacher because what they were like was like, this is going to be great. Let's tell this story, have these people talking about the, personal growth that she's made over this year. They've observed this is going to be such a rich addition to our, reporting. And so they got to the school, they were talking to this teacher and the principal of the school, and they were just like, we have no idea what you're talking about. Like, we have not seen that at all. She is the same person here as she was in September. And so they were like really taken aback because they were like, we can't make a compelling story about, our work on her self-confidence if and so they recalibrated to thinking more about how much of their program is strong in creating a safe space at the program for this young woman to be able to, feel safe enough to really bring her full self and show her full self. And so it wasn't that their program was, this like awesome space where she was able to really develop the self-esteem, or somewhat it was. But what they were really strong at was building those internal relationships and internal spaces where she felt like she could be that person. And so they shifted the way they talk about the work that they did, because what they were seeing in the data and information that they were doing, and as part of their conversations with partners, what they thought they were doing isn't exactly what they were actually good at. Another example of this that I'll say quickly is another program that I worked with that did specifically tutoring, academic tutoring for elementary school students. And they were kind of hanging their hat for a few years on their academic growth that they were really fostering with these students. And so they had a lot of academic, a lot of data that was really in their back pocket around like their grades improving, things like that. And so they had a new program director come in and was looking at it and was like, all of these kids are part of like 4 different programs in the community. They're getting extra support at school. Of course, their grades are going up. How can we possibly claim that has anything to do with our program? And so they had to really go back to their theory of change, really go back to their logic model and revisit everything to be able to say, what we're actually really going to focus on is being relationships first. That we're not going to necessarily hang our hat on this academic improvement and just hope that we're the ones doing it. We're going to really focus on building strong mentoring relationships between our tutors and the students, and start really focusing our our program narrative and what we want to measure on that kind of social emotional growth and strength of relationship, as well as community engagement and building that internal community. And so it was just a really powerful kind of recalibration they had to do around like, we're not necessarily having the same impact that we thought we were, and we have to completely change how we talk about our work, because the data is just not supporting us saying that this is what we're actually good at. So again, what is that you do? What are you good at? What do you need to work on? And how do you know? And so once you start asking yourself these questions and answering these questions, you can start really developing what are the actual questions that you want to ask. And so when you're thinking about what you want to measure, you started developing those outcomes. You're starting to think about, what is it that you are good at, what you're not. And so these are some questions you want to ask yourself as well, right? What is your capacity? It doesn't make sense for every program to be doing, a 10-page pre-post test analyzing every facet of social emotional learning quarterly for every mentee in their program, because it takes up time on your staff, it takes up time on the young people, it takes up a lot of time and energy, and you don't always have the capacity to do that. So what is it that your bandwidth of your program is able to do? Do you have dedicated staff who can commit to this? Are you all volunteer run? Are you, just like one person show? What is it that you can actually commit to? Because you want to make sure you're consistent, because that's the only way you're going to be able to really build this into any kind of real, consistent, cohesive report, is if you're consistent over time. Second, who are your stakeholders? What are your funders looking for? If you're getting funding to do specific work, you want to make sure that you're doing specific work so you can keep getting funded. The problem is when you start shifting your work just to get funding, that's a whole other thing that we don't have to get into. But the other problem is if the only evaluation that you're doing is just based on the grants that you're currently getting, you're doing yourself a major disservice, because what you really want to be doing is, again, working to be able to build up what is that really strong narrative, what our program is good at, what we do, what type of work that we're building up, so that we can continue to keep doing that and apply for new funding, or be able to bring this to individual donors that we work with. If we're if the only program evaluation and measurements that we're spending time caring about is ones that grants require, it's going to be really hard to build any kind of real sustainable infrastructure around how we do this, because that's going to be changing constantly. And you have to be a bit more forward thinking. And so that's looking ahead as much as possible, right? Like, so what's kind of on the horizon? What kind of work do we want to be doing? Where is the community going? Where are the needs shifting? We don't want to just end up on a treadmill of continuing to do the same work just because it's easy. All right. I might have to speed through the next couple of slides a little bit. Oh, no, I think we're good. So different instruments. So we talk about evidence-based a lot. What does it mean to be evidence-based? I think it's important to make sure that the work that you're doing is, if you're able to provide resources that are evidence-based, that's great, because that means that there is a body of evidence that's showing that the specific instrumentation or specific work that you're doing is been shown to work and make sense. And when you're thinking about how you want to build up your programs, both narrative as well as, what's the word? Kind of professionalism and kind of gravitas of you telling your story. The more kind of people signing off on the stuff you're doing, the better off your program is going to be, right? Because you're not going to have the capacity to develop all of your own instruments, to really feed them through any kind of vetting process to make sure that they're, most programs don't have the capacity to do that. So if we can find, instrumentation that other people are already building up and have shown to be effective, then, all the more resources for you. So I'm going to show you really quickly one of the resources that we, through our national office, provide, and that is the National Mentoring Resource Center. So let me see if I can share this. Okay, so this is nationalmentoringresourcecenter.org. They have lots of amazing stuff on here, and I could spend forever just showing this to you. I'm going to highlight just a few things quickly. One of them is what works in mentoring. So you can go down here. There's lots of different resources around what works and what doesn't. So you can see model and population reviews. So say you're doing mentoring with children of incarcerated parents. Here's a research review from February 2016 about, what's effective and what's not in that work. So lots of really great stuff on here. But what I want to point you to more specifically to this is if you go over here to Learning Hub, you go down to Measurement Guidance Toolkit. This is a really great resource for programs who are looking for, pre-post instruments that you want to use as part of your work. So for example, let's say you want to measure social emotional skills. Let's actually do interpersonal relationships and say very important non-parent adult. And so it measures whether a youth has an adult in his or her life who fills the role of mentor and who that person is. There's lots of basic research, but you can go down here where it says how to score. So that's how to use the survey, how to interpret it, and then access and permissions. So this measure is available for non-commercial use with no charge and is provided here. So this one's a Word document. Sometimes there are other things. Here we go. So here is just a survey that we can use. So does your program have someone who has a very important adult in their life? And they can check more than one box. So, there's lots of different ones on here. I find them very useful as a starting point. What I recommend too as well is playing around with some. All of them are free. Some of them, you have to, they might say, email the author for permission, things like that. And like that's, I've done it before and they're all very like, yeah, that's great, definitely use it. Let us know how it goes. As long as you're not making money off of it and it's just for your program. But they might have specific requirements, just be aware of that. But they are all available for free on some level. Anyway, it's a really great place for you to, sort through, spend some time reading about and looking at what types of different instrumentation is out there. I'm gonna put, never mind. All right, so for example, some other, pre and post tests I think are really important because it's just a baseline of what you can use to start really, hitting your, showing outcomes. It's just a basic. It's a basic. I don't know what else to say about it. It's the most simple thing that programs can do, and most programs, like we talked about, they do it on some level. Taking someone before they come to your program and asking the same questions before and after, and showing what the differences were is just the simplest way to show any kind of impact. What I think is important is making sure that we're doing them with, say, the mentees, young people, with mentors, getting information from parents or guardians or teachers or other adults in their lives, and really getting that more complete sense of what are they good at, what happened, more data points, combining that qualitative and that quantitative. What you don't want to do is just have just one survey with like 10 questions on it that you do pre and post, and then hang your hat on that as though you're really spending as much time as you should interrogating your program. Because the reality is you need more data than that. And so the more kind of information that you can really complete, whether that's partnering with schools to get academic information, whether that's working with, again, parents and families to get information from them, the more data points that you can collect and the more in-depth that information can be, the better off you're going to be and the stronger that your narrative is going to be, as well as making sure it's that clear mix of that qualitative and quantitative, right? And then lastly, a few in-depth assessments. These are ones that programs use, after-school programs use. They're very in-depth. So if you really want to I'm going to go in and we're going to have like a 10-page social emotional growth assessment that you really want to get dirty with it. DESA, SEAM, Ages and Stages. These are some resources and ones that you can do. Typically, you have to pay for these. But they are fairly well regarded in a lot of the youth development spaces for measuring things like social emotional growth. So the last thing we'll talk about quickly is another element is important is also like program satisfaction. And so, we're talking about how we measure the impact we're having on young people that we work with, and that's great, and that's important. We want to do that. But we also want to hear from the young people about what is their feedback about the program that we're running. And a lot of that, we talk about, continuous quality improvement in a lot of organizations, this idea of this constant feedback loop of what do we need to work on, what do we not. And sometimes it's about our outcomes, but sometimes it's just about creating space for the young people we serve to provide us with feedback around what they need from us. And so creating those spaces where we're able to elevate those young people's voices, especially marginalized voices, young people of color, LGBTQ young people, we want to make sure we're creating space for that so they can give us feedback on what they need from us, because they don't always have the space to be able to provide that feedback everywhere. And so, make sure we're elevating those, make sure we're creating space for them to provide feedback to us about what they think we should be working on, so they can guide the conversation, not just the survey around like, oh, on a scale of 1 to 5, like my self-esteem has gone up to a 4. We want to make sure we're creating real authentic spaces for them to provide our feedback, because again, we're not just beholden to the funders giving us money. At the end of the day, the people that we're most responsible to are the young people that we're serving. And so, revisiting our outcomes, revisiting what you're really good at, and then why do they stay as part of your program? Why did they leave? Making sure you're doing some type of policies and procedures around what's the term? Exit interviews. Making sure you do some exit interviews with folks that are coming in and out. Making sure you're getting feedback from mentors and mentees that are staying about what type of value they are finding in your program. Because again, you might be having an impact on these people in a way that you didn't anticipate, and that's going to shape what type of work you're going to be doing with them going forward. And so if your mentors and mentees are giving you feedback about your program, is providing them resources and support in a way that you didn't think of, that's great. That's great. But you want to figure out, then you want to start moving towards different ways to capture that. Maybe that's going to affect your theory of change and your logic model around what are these actual outcomes that we're doing? What are these resources that we didn't even realize we were using? All sorts of things like that. So I'm going to open it up for questions. If you do have questions, you can put it in the question box. While you are doing that, I'm going to put this little QR code on here. If you pull out your phone camera and point it right at this QR code, it'll pop up with a little SurveyMonkey link just to let us know how this went for you. And then as well, I'll send a follow-up email sometime before the end of the week, typically, with the PowerPoint slides and some resources we talked about, as well as a link directly to this survey if you don't get a chance to do it today. But it's just easier, I find, if I'm able to just knock it out quick on my phone. It's like 4 questions. But I'm going to pause here and open it up for questions. All right, well, I'm hoping that everyone got the survey at this point. Looks like a lot of you are filling it out. I'm going to go to the last slide really quick that has our contact information. That's our New York office. We're all working from home right now, so don't use that phone number because no one's there. But my email address is right here for you to reach out to. If you do have specific questions, that's great. You can reach out to me there. We do offer, like I said, individualized consultations with programs. So if you're just trying to figure what this means for your program, please let us know, and we'll definitely figure out how we can best support you. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great rest of your week, and I appreciate everyone joining me, and have a great day.